My name is Kristen Hovet, and welcome to the Otherautism podcast. I'm a research communications professional, and I have a master's degree in health studies. I was diagnosed with level 1 autism in my 30s, and I also live with health conditions that are often co-occurring alongside autism. The Otherautism is a place to explore late diagnosed autism, discuss the latest in autism research, and hear directly from autism researchers, help dispel myths and stereotypes about autism and autistic people, and more. If you're autistic or wondering if you might be, I'm hoping this podcast helps you to feel more informed and less alone. Today, I'm speaking with Heath Wilder from Australia. You'll notice that Heath and I jump right in with almost zero small talk, even before I asked an introductory question. And instead of trying to insert it somewhere in the interview, I just decided to leave it as is. Nice and authentic, autistic goodness. Also, this is a very, very special interview for me because Heath was one of the first listeners of the Otherautism podcast back when it was only on YouTube, and now it's not at all on YouTube. So, Heath might have been the first listener. If I recall, their comment was like the first one I saw on the Otherautism YouTube channel. But yeah, it was a YouTube channel, and originally it was the way I introduced it to the first listeners. And I decided, with everything on my plate, with work and school and everything going on, the setup for making videos was hard. It took longer anyway, and it took longer to edit. So maybe at some point in the future, I can bring that back. But for now, this is what we're doing. I am super, super excited to bring you this conversation with Heath. And I'm super grateful that I was finally able to get to speak with them. Without further ado, please say hello to my guest this week, Heath Wilder. Hey.
There we go. It's taking a little while to get all the audio and stuff together, but yeah, it's done.
Nice to see you, finally.
Yeah, it's funny because you used to do, when you did the YouTube podcast, and for some reason in my brain, it's just like, oh no, we've done this before. I'm like, oh no, we haven't.
I think you were one of the first listeners. So I like that you have they, them in your name.
It's kind of a reference to, I never really felt a lot of connection with the kind of male gender. When we kind of got around to people kind of passing around about Autigender, like autistic, kind of the gender that kind of goes with the, occasionally kind of tends to go along with how you feel about gender as an autistic person. And I was like, yeah, actually, that's really what I feel is true. And so I went with they, them, and intriguingly, it really messed with people's ontology. Like they were just, oh no, what does that mean? How is this, what's the thing? And I'm like, it's a personal expression. It's, I prefer it, but I kind of get it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was trying to explain this the other day, and I don't know much about, did you say Autigender?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a new term for me. I was trying to explain this the other day, that I am female. However, I don't feel very tied to that. Like that's never been a huge part of my identity. And I feel more like my gender or whatever is more like a costume, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, right? It's part of the mask. We grow up, and from around about the 4+ kind of school age, there was do I have to be this thing? And then just kind of trying to mold myself into this kind of shape of something. And so much of that at that stage is about gender, and it's about, you're in primary school, like you're like a 6-year-old, and people are going, who are you going to marry? You're going to marry this girl. That kind of like, no, what are you talking about? Like, this is inconceivable that this is going to have any kind of legitimate impact on my life. I'm 6, right? What do you? And in a lot of ways, I guess sometimes I may display very male qualities, but when it comes down, this is the clincher. When it came to diagnosing myself as autistic, I'm like, why am I not like Freddie Highmore? Why is Freddie Highmore not playing me in my real life, or Sheldon or whatever? Why am I not these versions of autism? How have I managed to mask all this time? And I started looking into it, and I'm like, oh, cool, female autism presentation. That really sits so much stronger with me than the classical male presentation.
I guess we haven't really started, but I will include that because I think it's really interesting. But I want
I've got an air conditioner. I just noticed I've got an air conditioning unit in here. And if there might be air conditioning sound. It probably masks out I've got a kind of a team of people kind of outside.
Oh, okay.
So they're probably doing your typical frolicking and stuff. Luckily, I have a door. So
nice. Yeah, so. The other thing I want to make sure you're okay with me using your full name in the show notes and in the title and everything.
That's totally fine. Like, I'm massively out and proud, and whatever I very quickly and made a pact with myself that I will, whatever lumps come with it, I will take them, so the people coming up behind us do not.
So could we start by introducing yourself and just explaining what brings you here?
My name is Heath Wilder, and as a visual description, I have a short dark hair. I have browny kind of tan skin and rectangular glasses, and I'm kind of wearing a headset today as well. And I've got a fuzzy background, but I'm kind of wearing a blue shirt with some white bamboo leaves on it as well, which is really lovely. It's quite nice. I am in my kind of late 40s, early 50s. That's how I appear. Heritage-wise, I am a mixture of various things. I'm Thorawal, which is Indigenous Australian from just a little bit south of what you might know as Sydney. I'm coming from Gadigal land, is the traditional lands that I'm coming from today. In my office at the Sydney Theatre Company, I'm Australian, Aboriginal, and Finnish Jewish on my mother's side, and my father's side is, I think, originally German, but they're from wonderful Alabama.
And what do you do at work?
Currently, for the last little while, I work in arts administration. My job at the moment is at Sydney Theatre Company is Director of Customer Experience. I'm fairly new to this role at Sydney Theatre Company. I used to work here years ago, and I've just come back here, invited by the executive director to come over and host the department that includes front of house or ushers services, box office, the analytics and insights team, and the database and applications team, and the application ticketing processes systems team, all of which are jobs that I've done in the last 7 years. So it's kind of an amalgamation of my arts administration work over the last kind of 7 to 10 years.
How old were you when you were diagnosed as autistic?
Yeah, I was kind of mid-40s. I was having some conversations with other people at work, and I found myself every now and again I'd fall into these really interesting conversations, or we'd have these conversations about things. And it's when I kind of fell into the leadership area where I started to kind of lead teams, and I would be very clear about what the needs were. Now, I've clashed with people over the years. I think we've all kind of been there. When I was starting to advocate for others, and I put down really emphatically put lines in the sand about these things need to be this way. You kind of said this, but then you did this other thing. Look, it needs to be this. And these conversations would blow up in ways that I just couldn't understand. And I had been called, over the years, been identified by other people as being Asperger's or autistic and various things. I had done a little bit of research into that over the years as well. And there was lots of things that I found that were similar, but I had kind of let that go, mainly because of the more I kind of went down that road, the more I kind of identified with that. When I have brought it up, I would get a lot of kind of pushback and a lot of kind of marginalization, I guess, from people who are really close to me. So I kind of let that go a fair bit. And after a couple of these blow-ups, and some very kind of respectful, kind, and wonderful mediation by some exceptional women I had a chance of working with at the time, still really good friends. I got to the point where I said, okay, I kind of know that this is a fact. I kind of know that I'm autistic. I've just got to kind of commit to it now. So I did 6 months worth of solid research. I was actually researching a friend at the time as well. I was playing this game of Dungeons and Dragons at the time, and a good friend of mine, we kept kind of clashing on various things, or there were certain things that were quite intriguing to me about how we were interacting. I was like, oh, hang on a sec. Are you autistic at all? And a bit taken aback. So I was like, okay, I'm going to research this before I kind of offend anyone any further. And I started doing this research, and I just fell down the hole of like how much this is really relates to me. So I wrote this document, which I kind of sent you earlier, this huge document on myself and what I was uncovering in very specific terms and how that would influence my viewpoint on whether I was autistic or not. Entirely for like 6 months, I was completely obsessed with it. I had on my phone, I had like a Google Doc, and I would listen to podcasts or read some stuff, and I'd write some stuff down, and I'd just throw it in on the bus, wherever I was, every spare moment. I'd just put it in there and write some things in, and I'd reference it, and I had kind of reference tables as well. And I'd do tests, and then I'd go and I'd kind of reorganize them into tables and groups and chapters. And it just became incredibly obvious that this is what was going on. So I kind of went back to work, and I said to my boss, we were talking, I said, look, starting off conversation, how are you? And I said, look, I just kind of apropos of like what we talked about the other day, I'm going to go and look for my autistic diagnosis. I don't know how to do that. I might talk to the EAP at the psychology services we had at work. I just kind of see how that goes. But I'll let you know where it is, because I just think we can clear a whole bunch of stuff up if we do this. Whilst I was saying this, the executive director of the Sydney Dance Company at the time walks by and goes, oh, yeah, this is where you should go. I've just been there with a friend, so that's where you're going to end up anyway. Go check them out. I'm like, okay. Kind of happens to no one, but kind of is the thing that you really want to have happen. And I went there and I did 3+ months of tests and filled out forms and all that sort of thing. And before I got to the end, way before I got to the end, they had this bit where they kind of bring you the significant others in and have a chat. I did that, and they sort of like, look, we're going to stop it here, because there's no way that you are not. We're pretty solidly convinced that you're autistic.
What changed after that, if anything?
Well, I grew a second head, and then
Thought so.
I got magic powers. People who talk about their kind of diagnosis journey. I hate the fact that we have to go through diagnosis in order to identify, just as a general rule. However, that specific moment in people's lives where they're waiting for their identity Oscar nomination to occur, right? The reports are the same. So what I felt when they said, sit down, we've got something to tell you. And they always, what would happen if you found out that you weren't autistic? And I answered as usual, as pragmatically. I said, well, I'll just have to go back to the drawing board and work out why the heck else I'm different from everybody else. And they said, well, in fact you are. And when they did, there was this huge rush of being alexithymic. I'll kind of explain it in generalized emotion words. A real light body feeling and real tingly kind of skin, and metaphorically, it is like a huge weight has been lifted. There is that kind of sense, and it's just an absolute relief, because things that intellectually, things that I completely understood to be the case, were then confirmed as being reality. It's like, somebody doing a DNA test and saying, hey, guess what? You're human. And you go, oh, wow. I knew that, but I just wanted to check. It is a huge relief, because it means that distress and blame and uncertainty all of a sudden make perfect sense.
Are you an autistic person based in British Columbia, Canada? Small Army Entertainment, in collaboration with a leading Canadian broadcaster, is developing an exciting new series inspired by a global hit. The search is on for autistic individuals aged 18 or older based in British Columbia to join as interviewers. Imagine this. You'll receive training and then step into a studio to interview A-list celebrities, bringing a fresh and unique perspective to the conversation. You'll have the chance to ask insightful questions and explore the lives of famous personalities in ways that no one else has. If you're interested in the possibility of interviewing major celebrities and being part of an incredible team of autistic interviewers, Small Army Entertainment would love to hear from you. Reach out at production@smallarmyentertainment.com. That's production@smallarmyentertainment.com. And you mentioned feeling different from other people. Do you remember, like in childhood, if that started then? And what were some of those things that you identified?
This is really interesting because I first felt different. I was going to say at school, which is true, but I first felt like I was stepping out of my space capsule and going on a spacewalk amongst the weird world fairly early, I guess, kind of about, about 2 or 3 or something. And well, my sister was just born, so I would have just been 3. My mum would go to, there would be mothers groups and there were other kids there. And apparently, you put kids with kids and apparently magic happens and they play and this is what's supposed to happen. I felt really out of place with these other children, whereby, at least with adults, they were fairly easy to judge what they were doing. The kids seemed to just be completely all over the place. Like they would just do all sorts of strange, random things and say stuff or do stuff that was really distressing. At one point, like one kid had come up and my sister was in a bassinet thing and the kid like slapped my sister in the face as a couple of months old. It was just like, this is outrageous. How is this happening? So I felt a real barrier. It's really hard to communicate with kids until a later age, like school age, maybe about 5 or 6. I was started to get introduced to the games that people play. Like there were, actual games, but they obviously mask a social interactivity network. But there was this navigating this kind of strange network of who is doing what with whom and people manipulating one another and seeing where those actual tools were. The game we played it in 6th grade, which was more or less playing the characters from the puppet TV show, The Thunderbirds. Who got to be what Thunderbird kind of depended on how socially cool you were and how many friends you had and how much chutzpah you had. And those things seemed to be really overt. People playing on people, the boys having no idea of sexuality, but there was one girl who was very charismatic and kind of would kind of play a game with who was more popular around about that stage. A whole bunches of things which just seemed very obvious that seemed to be completely I wasn't a part of.
What are your top 3 autistic traits that you love the most?
A whole bunch of kind of things that I really enjoy. At the moment, I love that I sleep. I'm on like 315 days of sleeping about 2.7 hours a night. I work an enormous amount of time, but really do need some downtime. Hyperfocus, I think, is an absolute godsend. Yeah, I think hyperfocus is one of my absolute favorite autistic tool. One of the things I love about every autistic person I know that I've come in contact with and had the absolute pleasure of spending time and working with and calling my friend is the lack of hierarchy and the egalitarianism, the sense of equality. The last one, I think they might kind of bounce around. There's little things like sensory sensitivity, which I absolutely love. It also is the fact that the gains turned up on the wall from the sensory insensitive people that we share this place with, who set up the rules, is a bit tricky. But I think the drive, I think just that kind of, things that we want to kind of change the name of on occasion, but special interests, those kinds of drives and focus is really important. I think it's really important to us. It's really important to healing and especially for me for burnout and the world for getting to where it needs to go and having people solve the dilemmas that we currently face. Autistic special interests, the way that any of that's ever going to get done.
What's a myth or stereotype about autism or autistic people that bothers you the most?
There's so many to choose from.
Totally.
I was arguing with somebody about autism and lack of empathy the early hours of this morning. I think that's probably one of them. I think the double empathy problem is the most frustrating thing. And it comes because there seems to be this idea that barrier is insurmountable. that holistics or neurotypicals and autistics can't communicate, or that autistic people can't be communicated with. As a consequence, because there's an opt-out button on double empathy from one end, what I see is a lot of people struggling to do double duty on connecting and kind of getting burnt out. So yeah, the autistic people lack empathy or the ability to be communicated with. I think it's a huge, huge issue.
How does empathy show up for you? Because I know you said you are kind of, or were drawn to the idea of the female autism phenotype and sort of identified with that more so than the traditional presentation. So I know with the female autism phenotype, typically that's associated with high empathy or almost like overly high empathy. So how does that show up for you?
How that shows up for me is, yes, I am very, at times, in abundance of empathy. So I have empathy to spare, to go around. And that comes out as kind of connection with things like connection with animals, connection with ethics, connection with, especially connection with people and causes and interests. Things move me in exceptional ways. The intriguing part of this, and this is what I would love to have kind of a quorum on, is how alexithymia plays into that. So I believe that I'm alexithymic because I know I have emotions. I have a lot of them. I struggle to identify what they are because, as far as my thinking goes, those role models where emotions were labeled were not present in my life. I struggle to see a lot of what's displayed in sitcoms where I kind of learned how to do most socializing. There's a lot of emotions fairly clear displayed there that I wouldn't respond in that particular way. I can mask in that way. So as a consequence, I have a really bad labeling system for my internal processes. So I can feel really strongly about something. And I know that I have some sort of a kind of a vector of force towards that thing or away from that thing that's very internally generated. But I don't really know what that is. So I might say to myself, or if I'm have fairly flat affect, which I tend to do in hostile and sometimes autistically poor environment, I will not display that. And I won't know that I'm have empathy there until I kind of look at that back in the past. I think we have lots of empathy. I just think it's hard for us personally and others to identify that that's what's going on there.
Right. In the moment, it's challenging sometimes for sure. I think part of it is, at least for me, the complexity of emotion doesn't really match like the labels that other people have given it. So it's like I could be feeling so many positive things and negative things at the same time. So picking it apart is challenging for me. And then the other thing is just the constant bottleneck of information in the brain.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, how do I pick out what I'm feeling when I'm having to parse through all these like other things, including my own thoughts, my sensory overwhelm, etc. So,
are you a visual thinker much at all?
Oh, totally. Yes, very much so. Yeah.
I find that it's quite difficult for me to be able to pass what's actually happening unless I can kind of map it out in some way, unless I can kind of find some kind of visual metaphor for that thing. And until that happens, I'm quite scattered and picking things up and dealing with what I already need to process at the same time can be, somewhat overwhelming. So yeah, similarly.
When we were setting up the interview, you sent me the document that we've referenced already called Autism Thoughts, where you outline what it's like for you being autistic. So these next few questions are based on that document. In Autism Thoughts, you wrote, "No one knows who I am because it's never been safe to show anything other than a character like a puppet and perform out of that." I'd love to hear more about what you mean by this. You say playing a character like a puppet. So is this similar to the concept of masking?
Yeah, I think that's kind of metaphorically how I would describe masking and what masking is to me. There is a kind of a distance that I would have with people that I trust less, that I know that will try and manipulate me. So I will operate in a way that keeps me engaged and displaying what they need to display, but at a kind of an arm's length. The reason I kind of came up with a metaphor, so I started off leaving school after I left school at high school at 17. I started doing science and medicine, and I got my master's in physiology and neuroscience. But after that, I kind of fell into acting for about 25 years. And there was this one metaphor about good acting and bad acting. And there's a clumsy way of thinking about it, but good acting is inhabiting a thing and actually living the role. So you're you're telling your own experiences through another lens. And bad acting is holding up like a puppet or a shield or something like that, and showing that as those motions as who you are. But it does feel like that. It does feel like I'm creating a simulacrum, like some homunculus that is representing me. It's an avatar for me in relationships. And for years, I would try things out, and I would have ways of expressing and talking and trying out ideas. And I was going to say very quickly found out I really didn't. I still do it and get in trouble for it now. But I will try out different kinds of aspects of who I might be, or things I might want to see, and they weren't accepted. So I would create a persona that works very well in that situation. In sales, I kind of did my share of waiting and box office sales and whatever. There is a character that I play there that's extremely outgoing, a very upbeat kind of person who laughs and jokes in a particular way. And that's my way of interacting. Often I found the best ways to get by in social situations and to get the most mileage and keep safe is to play it like a character, like a sitcom character. I've been guilty of watching a whole bunch of Friends and then turning up to a party, and I will pretty much be doing my Chandler impression. That's kind of what that is. It's kind of doing things that people want to see so that you can get by and get the minimum that you need from that encounter.
I definitely identify with that too. And I've used terms like effigy or, something like along those lines, right?
Yeah.
I feel like I definitely understand the use of it, but I know that it's also had an impact on my sense of identity. And I've had to figure out, okay, when am I being myself? And when am I being like the effigy self? How have you found ways to, I guess, resolve that, either with relating to people who actually see you, or other ways?
Yeah. I think this is one of those very complex, difficult topics that we need as a community. We need to be careful but rigorous in how to stop masking and when to stop masking, and know that masking is a choice. Sometimes it's something that we can play with. And when masking, which is a coping tool, most of us use it as a coping tool. And then when we choose to drop it, there are difficulties in doing that because it's so ingrained for so many years, but also dangers in doing that in the wrong space and being vulnerable. And to be completely fair, dropping it in situations where we're not safe. For people to come out and then unmask, it's super dangerous. Although masking does take a huge amount of, I've done some tests on myself, and roughly masking cost me about 20 IQ points of problem solving, and it is exhausting, and it takes up a lot of space, daily space. I'm just kind of scripting everything all the time. But what I've found is after being open and honest and safe and having the privilege to be able to do those things, honestly, not everyone has that privilege, but I've found that masking has kind of changed itself. It's taken itself away. It's something that I now actively need to do if I'm going to do it rather than reflexively. That has stumbling points and very tricky parts that can get me into sort of weird trouble. But that being said, I've managed to find a very kind of privileged situation that I'm in so that that's less of a consequence for me. Yeah, demasking, it's interesting. It means that now I'm reflexively honest and open and present and in the moment. I will talk about what's in my heart. Given my role, this is quite funny. I've realized that I'm unable to be professional. The word professional is a middle-class white male word that defines success, and I think it's really relevant. But I will certainly be kind. So it's about being honest and present and doing my best to be the best person that I can be for the people that I love in the room. It's meant that I love a lot more, that I'm very open about telling people how much I care about them. I try not to let a moment go by where I don't tell somebody how much I appreciate them. It means that I'm very much able now to be clear where I've made a mistake without getting caught up in self-worth. And I'm also able to do a lot more mentorship from a very honest and clear kind of standpoint and get support, ask for support, create support for others because I can say, hey, I need support here.
I love what you wrote. I don't fear groups of people. Their noise hurts me. You said I get massive overload anxiety while I try to work out what to say. So I'd love to hear more about what you call overload anxiety, what this feels like, and in what contexts it happens.
I think society, in a way it's kind of constructed in the present tense, is in a way that is exclusive or not really inclusive for a lot of us with sensory sensitivities and social sensitivities, keeping track of all of those things all the time. I tend to think about myself as not having any kind of unconscious or preconscious or any kind of processes. I kind of keep track of all those things in real time all the time, which I don't, having conversations other people don't do. Because of that, if I'm in a big environment we tend to do a lot of celebration here. It's in the arts. And we tend to celebrate our wins and our great opening nights and shows and whatever in a really loud, noisy way. Like there will be lots of, hey, here's this thing we want to really welcome somebody, so let's make heaps of noise right about now. That is fairly overwhelming. If it's just noise coming from one place, it is dealable. But when you start layering on top of things, social interactions, how people are pushing one another as push-pulls, the cocktail party phenomenon, so lots of people talking at the same time and trying to keep track of every conversation, lighting, just general lighting, sensory changes that you would get, bad clothing, adding those things together kind of fills your cup to the surface. And you've only got a little bit left at the brim to actually deal with stuff. Occasionally, then once you're kind of juggling all these balls and mixing metaphors, a little stumbling block will kind of push that over the edge, and you will start pushing into the danger zone territory where your kind of brain and your body will start to just rebel against that and say, sorry, we've kind of got a no-go zone. Emotions have gotten involved now, and we need change. So we need to get out of this situation. Just a quick metaphor for that. I was a box office staff member whilst doing a whole bunch of other things, was my kind of third job, and putting in a busy ballet show in the Sydney Opera House, which is a busy place. Give tickets out, make sure that everyone was fine, keep them leaving. There were probably pushing about 1,500 people through in less than an hour. And a boss would come up and tap me on the shoulder and want to talk to me about some other fairly esoteric thing. I can do my job fantastically, really well in all those conditions if it's focused. Start throwing in other things in different areas, and that's kind of danger territory. So in that case, it would be like, I've just really got to compartmentalize this. I need you, and there's hierarchies here, I need to stay out of the box, or we need to go somewhere else and do that, because otherwise I'm going to go into a meltdown or a shutdown or something, and it's not going to be pretty for anyone.
Advocacy groups are making a difference, not just for individual patients and families. They are also shaping the healthcare landscape for all of us. But who are these people fighting for patients' rights? What strategies lead to success? And what pitfalls should be avoided? Welcome to Patient Advocacy Voices. I'm your host, Eric Racine. Join me on a journey to uncover the hidden stories of these remarkable champions for patients. If you're passionate about advocating for patients and want to accelerate your own efforts for the patients you serve, subscribe now to Patient Advocacy Voices.
That leads into my next question, actually. So in your document, you talk about having both meltdowns and shutdowns. And I especially love how you describe meltdowns. You said, meltdown feels like my soul is on fire. This stood out to me as super interesting because I use a similar phrase to describe what it feels like when I'm so overwhelmed that it's hard for me to form coherent thoughts or share ideas with others. So in those moments, I say my brain is on fire and there's nothing that will put the fire out. I just have to kind of wait it out or step away completely from the scenario, right? I'd love for you to talk more about your experience of meltdowns and shutdowns if you feel okay and comfortable sharing.
Yeah, totally. Of course. I think we have to if we're going to start digging into this stuff, because no one else is going to tell us. So often, in a lot of circumstances, when hitting overload, I will be get to a point that it will flag for me. I'll get a kind of a warning signal, and I'll be able to make a choice as to what happens. Sometimes that's not the case. It'll be so surprising that I will not have the choice to shut down or meltdown. I luckily have had enough kind of experience in my life where my meltdowns tend to be if you know the meme, the Credible Hulk, you know, the Hulk with the glasses on, and he has lots of supports all of his rage with backup theories. Often I will get very pointedly wordy in a early stage kind of meltdown where I will have my filter will go, but I'll still have coherent thought, and I'll be outraged. You know, I'll put my Karen hair on, and I'll be outraged and want to speak to the manager. That can happen. Often, if it gets too hard too fast, I will feel myself slipping into either a meltdown where because of adult and person, and especially childhood trauma, I will get to the point where I will just leave. I'll just need to leave. And I have certain ways of kind of dealing with overload. That is a meltdown. Shutdown, what happens is my body manages to catch it early, and it seems to turn off my ability I'll kind of be head in a box. Like I'll be this brain in a jar. I will completely core out all of my senses, sensations, and emotions. Sometimes I can do this purposefully, and I will be just barely, basically, and simply piloting my body as if my body was the puppet. When I get overload, and often this will actually happen as well in parallel with depression, more with depression, sometimes with anxiety, I will feel that sort of thing coming on where the only way I can possibly make people understand that, or even kind of allude to that myself, is that my soul is on fire. It feels like I'm in exceptional amount of pain, but I can't put my finger on where it is. And the pain is kind of like an idea of pain rather than anything that I can quantify as being, I was in a car accident about 10 or so years ago, and I broke my spine, and that was not actually painful, but it had that kind of sense that everything was wrong. And I was so overloaded with kind of like sensory burnout. It felt like I was morally and ethically, intellectually and socially just immolating, just going through the world, often smiling and doing things and being very, very shut down as I possibly could, while still kind of being interactive as much as I can, whilst feeling like I was on fire, which is kind of tingly, just every hair on my body standing up at the same time. It's like every sensation is open at the same time and taking in, and all of them are staring at the sun, hyper aware of everything, and also of my own internal experience. Like I'm also judging my own processing at incredible speed, and I'm feeling everything at incredible speed. And also it's very painful.
Would you say that shutdown is more extreme for you, or is it vice versa? Like if the overwhelm is most severe, would you most likely go into meltdown or shutdown?
I reflexively will go into shutdown. I think meltdowns are more exhausting and shutdowns are more damaging. They're safer. Shutdown is my way of controlling who I am in a space so that I am protective of my future and the people around me and myself.
So I so identify with your statement about listening to hours of science podcasts and reading science articles because you don't have anyone to talk with about these topics. So this is very true for me when it comes to medical topics. And when I find someone who's interested in talking about these things, they really quickly become like my favorite person ever. So one topic that's become one of my special interests, of course, in the last few years is autism. So one way I get to talk a lot about autism is through this podcast and by interviewing and presenting on this topic. So have you found any similar kind of strategies for discussing these things or having an outlet?
I have a few science friends. I find socializing really hard. So the way that I would ever do that is through work. And creating support networks is really what I always, especially kind of when I was deciding, okay, I'm going to live the autistic life and this is going to be better for me. I create social support structures. One of them was actually working out people to play Dungeons and Dragons with, which was a big escape for me when I was a kid. And the people that tend to kind of aggregate around that sort of thing are very much of similar inclination or either kind of scientists, often they're kind of autistic as well. That's really kind of good because I get kind of people that I can kind of talk about this stuff with. Often, though, I find that with people like us, we just want to talk about it all the time. And then they kind of have like downtime and they're like, I don't talk about work. I'm like, yeah, why? The reason that I made you my friend is so I can talk to you about this stuff that I want to talk about. Like, hold up your end of the bargain, why don't you? However, the better tactic was in a couple of places online, in various influencers or autistic advocates kind of groups of autistic people. I made some friends there, kind of formed a bit of a network that we can kind of talk about kind of stuff like that. Also in arts and culture, and we do that on Discord channel. So it's actually segregated. It's just us. It's a really good place where we can just sit there and be ourselves. And we still like clash every now and again and have discussions about, no, this is me and that's more like this, that's more like that. And we talk about autism, ADHD. In arts and culture, because what was missing in the international arts and culture space was workplace accommodations. I sometimes have these ideas. I think they're great ideas. And I go out and I go, yeah, this seems like it's a theory. It could work. So I'm going to form a group here and see who's going to turn up. I formed a regular kind of meetup of people in arts and culture for neurodiversity. I kind of cast the net fairly wide. And I found like people would turn up and they would turn up with like as lost and kind of needing other people as well. So that was also a really good way of unpacking it, talking about the autistic special interest and ADHD and stuff like that. That's kind of fulfills that. Some of the more specific kind of sciencey stuff is, to be honest, it's really hard. A lot of us kind of talk about spending most of our time living in Reddit forums, right? Like talking about the stuff that we want to do. But even that like can be a bit of a minefield. It's tricky. It is really difficult to do that. I tend to only have transactional based friendships, which was always like an absolute heartbreak of my life. But now I kind of have shared mutual parallel work friendships where we both kind of working towards projects together and we're sharing and we talk about stuff. There's lots of places like that, setting up those support networks where I can get at least some, I was going to say my fill, but there's nowhere near, it's never my fill of talking about autism, about accommodations, about, things that we need to do in order to get across the line. I need to solve people's problems. That's kind of one of my goals are. And if people know that I'm autistic, they'll get me in, Zoom in across the world to talk to them about accommodations in the workplace. So in that way, I can kind of also, I've kind of got a captive audience where we can kind of riff about those sorts of things. And people have problems, and apparently in neurotypical society, you can't actually talk about these things. They will, on the download, come and ask me a question about stuff, and I'll get a little bit of conversation about autistic special interests that way as well.
Thank you so much for sharing. This has been so interesting and awesome. But is there anything we haven't talked about that you wanted to make sure is included in the episode?
What I really want to include in the episode is just me saying thanks to you for doing this. I have followed varieties of your content for quite some time, and the level of insight is wonderful. It's absolutely brilliant. And I just wanted to especially just say thank you for that, because the candor, the humor, and the commitment to talking about the things that we really need to talk about, the really important stuff with kindness and depth and rigor, is what being autistic is all about, right? That is 100% peak autistic goals. So just thank you for that. It's been a massive benefit to me.
Oh, thank you. I wish I could spend more time making the podcast, but I also have to work. So one day, maybe it can be a full-time thing.
Look forward to all of the next stuff that's coming up.
Well, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Set my world on fire.
Until next time.
You're my heart's desire.
Bye.
I just wanna love you, just wanna hold you, just wanna be with you till we grow old. Please tell me you'll stay or take me away. I want you for myself every single day. You set my world on fire. You said set my world on fire. I don't know what I'd do without you. You make me smile, what is it that you do? My life was great till you added colors. Like the moon is the sun, we don't care about the others. You set my world on fire.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, I invite you to leave a rating or review and share this episode with a loved one. If you'd like to submit a question or message to listeners, please send an email. You can find the email address and more in the show notes.